Hi and welcome to the channel. So this video is part of the leather repair series which I'm doing, and in this video I'm going to be repairing a hole in a leather bag. Right, so the techniques I'm going to show today is exactly the same technique whether it's a leather or faux leather or vinyl covered bag, and exactly the same technique whether it's a bag or a coat, doesn't really matter. Right, so we're going to use this old faux leather bag which has been thrown out anyway, so I can do what I like to it. The reason I've chosen this as almost like the advancement of me learning leather repair is because this has quite a complex texture or pattern on the surface. Looks random, but it's actually quite uniform, so it's going to be really difficult to actually match up the repair. So I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully the camera will pick that up. So what I've basically done is just cut a hole for us to have a look at. Now if that piece was actually still intact but it was a tear, we'd follow the same principle here, but instead of filling it in, we'd use the piece that had come away, put the backing piece in first, glue that down, put this, glue it down, and then just tidy up the edge. So that would be quite simple. So obviously a hole is a lot more complex, which is what we're going to go through today. So the first thing we need to do is to glue in a piece of fabric on the underside of this hole and cut the fabric about 1 centimetre wider all the way around than the size of the hole. So if you go to a leather repair suppliers, they'll probably sell you fabric like this, which is extortionate when it comes to the cost, about 1,000 times more than the actual value of it. So what I found is calico triangular bandages in a first aid kit, which are about £1, £1.50, is absolutely ideal material to use for this size and type of repair, and you'll probably get 100, 200 repairs from one calico triangular bandage. So I'm just going to cut this piece now centimetre wider all the way around than the actual size of the hole. Right, so once we have our piece of fabric cut, again, it doesn't have to be a perfect shape, the next thing to do is we take a permanent marker and just put a dot in the centre, because this piece of fabric now is going to be fed into the hole, and we're going to glue the faux leather onto the actual fabric itself. And that gives a nice structure with which we're going to add in the filler. Putting the dot in the centre means that we don't lose whereabouts this fabric is, so once the dot's in the centre we know we've got good coverage of material all the way around. And the way that I find easiest is to place the fabric over the actual repair hole. Take something like a palette knife, so this is a cheap artist palette knife, and then we just feed this material in, and obviously the cocktail stick just keeps the fabric from wandering too much. Move that into the centre. So that's now our fabric perfectly placed. The next thing to do is decide what glue you're going to use. So the glue from a leather repair supplier, again, price is absolutely extortionate. I suspect that this is like a white substance. I suspect that this is possibly a flexible latex glue. I'll do some more research on that, because if it is a latex glue, then you can literally buy a litre of latex glue for the same price at this small 3mm or 5mm container cost. So you could either use a specific leather glue, or you could use a much cheaper alternative is a flexible contact adhesive. The only downside to a contact adhesive is it's quite stringy, so it'll produce obviously tail ends when you take it away from the tube, which can get onto your leather. But I'm going to use the contact adhesive anyway for this particular job. And again, if you can use something like this, the cost comes down quite significantly, and it's very readily available. Not all contact adhesive is flexible, so make sure you choose one. I believe the Gorilla Clear contact adhesive is really good for leather. So the way I do this is just take my toothpick, got some contact adhesive on the back side of the palette knife. I'm just going to touch it around the edge, making sure I've got plenty on, because obviously being a contact adhesive, it has to be coated to both surfaces. So if we get plenty on the underside of the faux leather or leather, we can press the leather down onto the fabric, pick it back up again. So we've now got contact adhesive on both the underside of the leather and the fabric. Wait for it to go touch dry, and then we can press them together to get an instant bond. Right, so once we've got our contact adhesive in place, make sure our dot is in the center. I'm going to push this down to coat both the fabric and the underside of the faux leather, and then I'm just going to pick these edges up again to allow them to become touch dry before we press them down firmly. Really important thing to do as well with any job, I suppose, not just this, is just to make sure that you clean all of your tools as you go. So I'm just going to wait for a couple of minutes now for that to go touch dry, and then I'm going to firm it down. Right, so this is where we're up to. We've got our dot in the centre of the repair, so we know we've got good coverage of the fabric under the repair itself. Our glue has gone off, so that's great. The next thing we need to do, so I've got this old piece of wood. We need to create a solid base under the repair so we can work on it properly, especially when we're looking at bags or coats. Something like a car seat that has padding underneath, so that's fairly stable, but we need to do this. If you don't do that, you're going to get an uneven finish on the repair, and also you tend to push too much filler through, which means you'll create almost like a lump underneath, and on a coat you'll be able to feel that excess filler through the lining of the coat. So a nice solid base to work on. So I'm using a flexible leather filler, sometimes called heavy filler. Now you can get the filler in different tones, so you can actually get the filler in black to match this. I'm using grey, but it doesn't matter because we're going to be colouring this in with acrylic paint later. So one of the things about any repair, whether you're doing leather repair, bodywork repair on a car, or repairing a scratch or something in a table, is the tendency is to increase the area of the repair without you even realising it, so that towards the end you can in some cases almost double the surface area of the actual repair. So we need to make sure that we don't do that, otherwise we're having to blend in a really large area. So I've got some water and a brush, so I'm going to be using a cheap sort of artist brush, and any excess filler we have at the end of this process, we're going to use the water to actually wash it away, because we need to keep as much of this grain as possible, because although this isn't going to be an invisible repair, we want to make it as camouflaged or as blended in as we possibly can. And if we've got any of these lines filled in around the repair, it does tend to make it stand out. The other thing is really important, I found it is far better, you get a far better finish if you actually fill something like this in very thin coats. So even if it takes 3 or 4 coats, that's far better than trying to fill it in all in one go. So we take some of our filler. Again, I'm going to be doing some research on this because I suspect this filler is possibly just interior PVA glue, so it's water soluble, and maybe something like a plaster of Paris powder or something like that mixed in. So I'm just creating our first sort of fill like that, trying to keep within the confines of the repair if I can. Clean off the palette knife and then just in one motion taking the excess off. Then we take our brush, I'll use this one, it's better, and we just want to get rid of any of this excess that has gone onto the undamaged part of the surface. And initially we want to keep this repair within the confines of the damaged area itself. So once I've done that, you've got 2 options. One is to leave this to dry naturally, which in some cases can take up to 24 hours. Or what I'm going to do is speed up the process by using a hairdryer. So I've got the hairdryer on maximum heat, but on the first setting for the actual flow rate. And we're just going to take a couple of minutes, and probably about 7 to 8 centimeters above the repair. Right, so after a couple of minutes of using the hairdryer, the repair will be touch dry. It'll still be soft underneath, so don't get too confident with it, but it'll be sufficiently dry on the top so that we can apply a second layer. So exactly the same process as before. Just want to fill the actual repair site itself. And then the process now is, we went in that direction for the first layer, we're going to come back in this direction, the opposite direction for the second, because as we smooth the filler out, it does tend to pull away from the leading edge. So if we alternate the direction in which we're going to be filling, it will ensure that the filler goes all the way around and stays there. So same process again. Take our brush and mortar and just clear away any of the filler that's gone outside of that repair. And if you find areas that are a little bit high, you can always just flatten those down with the actual brush itself, and then tidy the brush up, the edge up as you would do before. Okay. And again, same process again. We're going to be using the hairdryer, maximum heat, but on the first flow setting. So we don't want to blast this, for 2 minutes again. Right, so after our second fill, you need to really inspect the area. You might miss things, but when we put our first colour coat down, so our first black acrylic paint colour down, once that's dry, that'll give you an even better view of what's going on. But when I've inspected this, this seems to have been filled in great. This edge, however, is slightly raised from the bag to the filler, so I'm going to be placing another layer of filler in there, and the next time I take the filler off, the excess off, I'm actually going to go in this direction so that it comes up to the edge of this part of the bag and fills that in. So same process as before, we just don't need that much. Again, just make sure that it goes to right up to the edge. Clean that palette knife off, and as I said, this is the direction we want to go in. So I'm not pressing down too much, and I'm creating almost like a 45-degree angle for the palette knife. Brush and get rid of that excess. So once we're happy that we've now filled in all of the repair area with the heavy filler, the next thing to do is our final layer is going to be our texture layer, and that is possibly the most difficult part, to see if we can replicate in any way this type of pattern. So there are stamps you can get, or rubber pads, which won't be anywhere near the same as this, but they'll give some form of texture, maybe hide it a little bit. So I've been doing some experimenting with regard to this particular type of small, almost uniform pattern. And this stuff, which is basically what's called scrim. So this is like a nylon scrim which goes on drywall or plasterboard down the seam. It's plastered in, and then obviously plasterboard over the top, and this prevents those seams from coming through the finished plaster. So again, it's almost like a plastic material, and of all the experiments I've done to try and replicate in some way this type of pattern or texture, this stuff has been the most successful, and I'll show you how I've done that. So I've taken a piece of that scrim, I've distorted it, sort of pulled it, with it being almost like a plastic, it will distort a little bit because obviously this is far too uniform a colour. Also the squares are too, or if you turn it on its edge, the diamonds are too big for this particular pattern. So what I'm going to do is place this over the repair, pull corner to corner like that. Hopefully you can see that in this orientation, because this is where the pattern goes, and I'm going to put some heavy filler over the top, going just outside the repair area, take the excess off with the palette knife, pull this away, and then hopefully that will give us a texture which won't be identical to this, but it will replicate it in some way. That's the theory anyway. Okay, so let's do it. We put our scrim on, and pull down to create that pattern. Take some of our filler, and again I said we want to go just outside the actual repair area itself, like that. Take off the excess and just peel that back. So now we've got our textured pattern. I'm going to use the artist brush again with some water just to take off these outside bits, but be careful you don't flatten down any texture on the main area, because again that will show up. It's good the fact that it's an uneven shape as well, because I'm hoping that will mask off mask the repair. If this was too uniform, obviously that would stand out as well. So I'm going to use, just take off some of this excess water, otherwise when we put the hairdryer on it this will just scatter and it'll be more difficult to clean the area off. So what I'm going to do now is hairdryer on this again and dry this out for another 2 minutes, and then we can start to apply the paint. Right, so this is where we're at. So as you can see, hopefully you can see, we've got some texture there, not the same as the faux leather texture, but it's similar. Gone beyond the repair area, as I said. This is now touch dry, but don't get too overconfident, because although these different layers are touch dry, they're still very soft in the middle, so no sanding whatsoever. I've seen a couple of videos on YouTube where they're almost suggesting that you can sand within 15-20 minutes of doing the repair. In my experience, that is definitely not the case. So the next thing to do is go into colour. Obviously this is black, so it's fairly easy. So I bought some acrylic or water-based paint marketed for colouring leather, but I suspect I'll do more research on it and I'll do plenty of other videos. I suspect that most flexible acrylic paints will be suitable for faux leather and leather, but I need to do that research first. What I want to do is obviously try and save money, because anything that's targeted at any specialist area, it doesn't matter what the subject matter is, normally there's at least 10 put on the price of the cost of the product. So I've got some black. One of the problems with acrylic paint is that it's naturally glossy, so even though this looks like it's got a gloss on it, I can guarantee the paint will probably be a lot more glossy than the surface itself. So I've got to finish this off. I've got a thing called leather finisher in matte, which hopefully will blend in even more. So all you have to do with the acrylic paint is just some onto a cloth, and I'm just going to dab this on nice and gently, and hopefully this will add to the texture anyway. Just a very light coat as well, very light coats for this, because you don't want to fill in the voids in between the grain that you've just put on. Okay, so once we've done that, hairdryer again, just to dry it off. Okay, very light coat again. It's probably going to take maybe 3 or 4 coats to do this. So And you keep these two nice and light coats. I'm going beyond obviously the repair area to try and blend this in. If you feel like the filler is becoming soft again, just leave it for an hour or so. Right, so this is where we're at now. About 4 coats of paint on this. Really happy with this section. Seems to have blended in really well. This part still sort of standing out a little bit. The last stage really before the finisher goes on is to lightly sand this area down using 600 grit sandpaper. I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to wait 2 days. As I said, I've seen videos where literally within 15-20 minutes they're sanding the area down. I have learnt from my mistakes that is not what I'm going to do here, because this repair will still be quite soft. So I think I'm going to leave it here with regard to the video. I might put some finisher on actually just to show you what the finisher looks like, and then from that I'm going to leave it there, and then obviously in a couple of days I'll sand it down. And what will happen is this edge will start to sort of fade in. It's never going to be perfect, as I said right at the start of the video, but I'm really happy with the results. So I'm going to put some finisher on now, which is basically just looks like a very weak latex solution. It dries clear. I'll just go beyond. You can dab this on as well. I'm just putting it on with the paintbrush, and this will blend the actual shine finish of the leather in together with the repair area. And obviously I'm just doing this for demonstrations. I would do the entire side or panel if I was doing this for real. And again, we can dry this with a hairdryer. Right, so there you go, that is our repair. Nice close-up finish. So as you can see, not completely invisible, and once I've done that sanding around the edge, that will blend in a lot more. It's never going to be fully invisible, however, compared to having a large hole in the fabric or the leather, got to be a lot better. So that's it. I'll put the leather repair videos in one playlist so they're easy to follow. Lots more coming out as I practice and develop more skills. Obviously I'll put those onto the channel. Please subscribe to the channel, and as usual, if you've enjoyed this particular video, hit the like button. Thank you very much for watching.